Good morning, and welcome to another episode of A Conversation with Father Orsi. I'm B.C. Cloutier, Chairman of the Board of Action for Life, and this is Father Michael Orsi. How are you doing, Father?
Fine, fantastic.
Good. And how are you doing on your Lenten sacrifice?
Well, so far so good.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. I'll drink to that.
I'll certainly drink to that on Easter. But for those of you who don't know, Father and I both independently chose to give up alcohol for Lent.
You don't realize how you could get kind of attached to that glass of scotch or glass of wine. And, your body says, hey, it's time for a little libation.
Yeah.
But then, like after a week or so, you really didn't need it anyway. So
That's kind of the way I'm feeling.
Yeah.
But it does bring to mind a great Frank Sinatra line. Frank said, "I pity people who don't drink because when they wake up in the morning, that's the best they're going to feel all day." And I can imagine that was true of Frank and the Rat Pack.
yeah, Dean Martin.
Boy, those were crazy times. Maybe we can do a show about those guys one of these
Do I
days.
have to act like Dean Martin?
Hey, Father, I saw an editorial recently in the Wall Street Journal that said America still needs a COVID reckoning.
Mm-hmm.
And, I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. Well, by the time I get to the end of the editorial, and I'm sorry I don't remember the author's name, boy, this guy nailed it. And let me just give you some highlights. The interesting thing is all of us collectively have been aware for a long time, like for decades, that there's incompetence, there's wasteful and corrupt governments, biased and dishonest journalism, agenda-driven schools and universities, and nothing was being done about it. And then the pandemic hit, and that was an opportunity that I think was missed. It was, in the words of the author, the most tragic breakdown of leadership and ethics in our life. And that, he talks about the ill-advised lockdowns, the disrupted learning, which our kids are paying for to this day, the unnecessary deaths, particularly in nursing homes, the global recession, which was, we now know, largely a result of lockdowns, mental health challenges, social isolation, which was just terrible, and the rise of misinformation, which led to a greater distrust in government. We're dealing with all those things today. It seems to me that Donald Trump is trying to address some of these issues.
Yeah. A few days ago, I was speaking with one of my brothers, and we were talking just about, what the COVID lockdowns did. And he said to me something that, I hadn't thought of. He was a lot younger than I was, and he was at home for a longer time than I was, okay? My father was a dry cleaner and tailor. And he said to me, he says, I've been thinking, he said, if Daddy were in business during the lockdown, we would have no income. How would we pay the bills? How would we maintain even food on the table?
Yeah.
Because he depended on people having their clothes dry cleaned and having tailoring. He had a very good clientele. Most of them were professional people, but they weren't leaving their homes. And certainly my family would have suffered terribly. I mean, we would have had to go on home relief or welfare, whatever they call it these days. So when you think about it in those terms, just think of how frightening that would be.
Well, but if your dad owned the liquor store, everything would have been fine.
Oh, sure.
Somehow liquor stores were exempt from this whole social distancing. And you look at people like your dad, small business people, working hard, making a day's pay, but putting food on the table and educating their children. And all of a sudden that ended.
Yeah.
Boom.
No income. What do you do? And, I think we look back at it now, and we also have some very, very serious questions as to, was it for real? And I've just been reading recently that a lot of misinformation was given to President Trump regarding the COVID crisis. And therefore, a lot of things went into effect that if he had had the truth, perhaps would not have happened. And one of the things that we see is a tremendous breakdown in the educational system.
Oh,
Now, folks, I don't think American education is or ever has been as good as it could be. Okay? But now we're getting the results of what has happened. We're behind now 2 years in reading, 2 years or 2.5 years in mathematics. And our society, our children have suffered terribly from that. Now, even more than the breakdown in education was the breakdown in relationships between people. And let me just go back to the students. A lot of the students were not able to go to school, and instead they had to stay home. And if they did go to school, they were kept in isolation from each other by fiberglass between the desks. They couldn't go out and play. And so you had a lot of children now being deprived of their social skills.
right. They have no social skills
And
or limited social skills.
the wearing of masks, which was unproven that it would do any good at all. They said that children, even little children, were in some way delayed in their learning because they could not see the expressions on people's faces, and your face will tell you a lot about your interaction with somebody else.
Sure.
So it's done a lot of damage to children. One of the things that is not talked about enough, and I certainly have been very concerned about this even during the epidemic, because tell you the truth, BC, I never really believed in the whole thing. I'm sorry, folks.
Well, you didn't get vaccinated, right?
Well, I'll tell you what happened. I'll tell you what happened. All right. I got very concerned because the suicide rate went up among teenagers because they did not have the ability to socialize. A lot of them spent time on the internet and interacting with people who were not after their best interests.
Right.
And these are influencers, and a lot of them were convinced that suicide might be the best thing for them to do. So even in my conversations with undertakers, funeral directors, they said, we're getting a lot of young people, teenagers, who are committing suicide. And it could be directly traced back to the isolation and the fear that life is not worth living. You're going to die anyway because of the reporting regarding COVID vaccine, COVID crisis. And then I'll talk about the vaccine in just a moment. Now, let me get to the vaccine. Usually there are what we call FDA standards. Something has to be tested over, I think it's a 7-year period of time, and there has to be a lot of trials with these
Clinical trials.
trials with these vaccines to see if they are indeed efficacious. That this thing efficacious means that it's working. That it's working. This COVID vaccine, whether it was Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson, whatever one you want to talk about, the question then became were they tested properly? And I think the answer coming back now is no, we didn't have enough testing on these vaccines.
Right.
And people now are saying, well, the reason why we are having so many people who are coming down with heart conditions or people who are getting some kind of a paralysis is because they took the COVID vaccine. I don't know. I don't know.
There is a theory out there that long COVID doesn't exist. What exists is the result of the vaccine, the negative reaction to the vaccine in certain people that they were originally diagnosing as long COVID. And now they're saying, and it's not, as you know, it's not only heart disease, it's respiratory issues. Yeah. And they think that perhaps what is it? mRNA is responsible. Now, who knows if that's true, which takes us full circle back to it's hard to believe anything you read these days, Father.
One of the things that I also have been interested in is people who are having heart attacks or strokes. Some of the autopsies and some of the things that the funeral directors are telling me is that they detect that there are, I'll call them worms in the blood.
Wow.
Blood coagulating. And they say this is true. And many of them say they can trace it back to the vaccines. Right. I don't know how scientific that is, but I'm sure people are going to be looking at that and say, is this because of this?
Let's hope so.
No. Now, regarding the vaccine itself, there were some really moral issues that I think the proper authorities failed to address. And one of the things is this, could you force somebody to get a vaccine?
They essentially did, Father,
Yes.
because, I think the audience knows that Gina and I have a place up in Buffalo, and we go up there for the summer for holidays. We were up there over, I guess it was Christmas holiday. You couldn't go to a sporting event.
Right.
You couldn't go to a concert unless you could prove that you had the vaccine. That was coercion
Yes.
by the government.
Yes. So you were forced into doing something that you didn't feel was right, and also you have a right to say what is and what is not going to go into your body.
All those military people that were discharged, which fortunately President Trump has now reinstated them with back pay and all. But can you imagine you're serving your country and they say, if you don't take this jab, you're out of here.
And furthermore, the virus was not attacking people of that age. They were even giving this vaccine not just to teenagers or people who were in their early 20s, military people, but even to little children. Now, what's the results going to be, down the road, years from now? Little children were not dying of COVID. Teenagers were not dying of COVID. They might have gotten a cold. I mean, I had them in school where they were tested positive for COVID. Oh, you have to stay home in isolation now for a month. It was ridiculous. It was absolutely ridiculous. But I'll tell you what happened with me. Because it relates.
Let's take a break, then you can tell it.
Okay, I'll tell it.
We'll be right back after this. But for the moment, I'd like to talk to you about the expense of airing this program. Many people don't realize how expensive it is to produce this program and to get it on the air. Would you care to guess? It's about $3,000 per week. We think that's a reasonable expenditure, but obviously it's an expensive one. So we need to ask for your help. If you'll go to actionforlife.org and click on the donate button, it would be greatly appreciated. Now, you can donate once or you can donate each month, and we certainly have viewers who do both. We appreciate that. Please take time now to visit actionforlife.org and click on the donate button. Thank you so much for your support, and may God bless you always.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've always heard about Abraham Lincoln saying that America is the last best hope of the world. Keep that in mind. A lot of us these days do not appreciate our country or are letting ourselves fall short of what America is supposed to be and what America can be. We live in a society today which does not hold the same values that our founders had and what Abraham Lincoln held so dearly. Go back on history, see what they said, and to know who we are. Pass that on to your children. It is a matter of salvation, saving our country, and sometimes even means saving our souls, because America is a light to the world. Let us continue to pray for our country and to vote for those people who hold in their minds and hearts the vision of our founders, of Abraham Lincoln, and of Ronald Reagan.
Welcome back to a conversation with Father Orsi. I'm B.C. Cloutier. So, Father, before the break, you were about to say what happened to you.
Yeah, well, they were giving out a test called to test you whether you had the antibody from COVID. So I went to get the test because, I've been in the hospital. I've been around sick people a lot. And they were giving it at the firehouse. And they made you park your car, and then, you had to be separated by, a million miles between, which there's no proof of that either. Fauci said, where'd you get the 6 feet? I just made it up. I mean, he didn't even know we got the 6 feet. The same thing with the masks. Put the mask on. Wear the mask. Wear 2 masks. Wear 3 masks. Where did you get that? The mask didn't help. There was only one mask, the M95, You see them, they're kind of like a roundish mask, not the little piece of paper you
Right.
put around. But they did no good. And the N95 only helped about 10%. So even that was a farce. I'm the science. Yeah, he's got a lot to answer for, this man, okay?
Yeah.
Didn't he get pardoned? Did he
Yes, yeah.
I'm sorry, folks.
He hasn't been accused yet,
Yeah.
but he's been pardoned.
He's been pardoned. Okay, let's hope we can get him indicted anyway.
It was probably Joe's auto pen.
Yeah, I hope so. But let's hope that at least he can give some testimony and say, this is what happened, this is what didn't happen. So anyway, I go there, and they take a little bit of my blood, and they say, you have to go wait by your car. And then, what kind of car do you have? I tell them what kind of car I have. I said, I have a Tesla. And guy comes running out. One of the firemen come running out. Who's Michael with the? No, I wish I had a Tesla. With the Kia. I raised my hand. You're the lucky man. You're a lucky man. I said, why? You have the antibodies. I had them. So I must have had it, the disease, but I didn't know I had the disease. So anyway, then they wanted to get some of my blood, for a transfusion.
To give it to other people.
Give it to other people. All right. So if you see some people walking around that kind of look like me, that's what happened. You have a lot of women out there now with big gray hair and beards. So I went back to I was telling some of my doctor friends, and they said, "Oh, you're at the hospital. You should get the COVID shot anyway." So all right. So I did. I got 3 of them, 2, and then the third, the booster shot. But I didn't need it. All right, I didn't need it. And then a bunch of doctors came to me from a certain hospital, and they wanted me to speak on their behalf because they said, we don't need the shot. We have the antibodies. And if you have the antibodies, you don't need the shot. Now, these are men of science. This is not just me, reading an article about it, but these are men of science who have studied all this stuff. They lost their privileges at the hospital. And I said to the CEO at the hospital, I said, CEO, I said, why did these guys lose their privileges? He says, well, I don't do that. The other doctors give them their privileges.
My own personal experience was someone said, call this number and you'll get in line for a shot. Because I kept, as I'm sure many of you have or did back then, going to the Publix website
Right.
every day. So I call this number, which was in Miami-Dade, and I thought it was automated. So I left my name, date of birth, phone number. They'll never call me back. The next day they called and they said, can you come to whatever the baseball park is called in Miami? I forget now. I said, yeah, sure. So I went over there and I got a shot, and then I waited whatever it was, 3 weeks, and went over and got my other shot. And I did so enthusiastically.
Because you were scared.
Well, I was afraid, but also I was not social distancing. I refused to do that kind of stuff. I wasn't going to end my life, Then I got the booster. I've had COVID 3 times.
Did you feel sick?
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
But I mean, no worse than a bad cold or maybe a mild flu. But I have friends who did not get jabbed and did just fine. So, I think that's one of the reasons that some of us have no trust in the media and in our elected officials.
Yeah, it was a terrible hype.
It was a con job.
Yeah, it really was a con job, and it affected, as I said, it affected family life too.
Wow.
A number of divorces because, look, folks, I know you love your husband, you love your wife, but like 24/7 is a bit much in the same.
How about the people?
I was fighting with myself.
How about the people? I mean, this is really, really just heartbreaking. One of the couple is in a nursing home. I saw a picture of this online recently. The wife is in a nursing home. The husband has his hand up against the glass. Yeah. He could not go in and visit with his own wife.
That happened with me numerous times at the hospital in the ICU unit. Somebody was dying. Now, they had COVID, yeah, but they also, usually it hit people who were usually elderly.
And had underlying conditions.
Exactly,
right? Yeah,
exactly.
Sure.
But the person would be dying. Family couldn't go in. And I was there at the hospital and they had me dressed up like a spaceman. I mean, I have some pictures of me like you think I was on the moon, and honestly. And then they would Zoom me. The nurses would hold a Zoom camera and Zoom me to the family as I was praying over and anointing the person. So, and I fell in love with the nurses. They were just wonderful. I have never in my life seen people work so hard and try to accommodate people, especially families who are panicking. I also saw nurses themselves breaking down. I remember sometimes you go in and you find some nurse sitting down just crying with what was going on and the overburden that was put on them because of the COVID crisis with patients and with families. So, folks, what happened was an absolute disaster. I'm not saying COVID was fake, but I'm saying that the solutions that were given were manufactured with very, very little
Draconian.
Yeah.
Absolutely draconian.
Yeah.
Now, our education system, as we've discussed on this program many times, is, I think inferior might be a kind word. Now you get kids that were out of school for a year, in some instances, almost 2 years.
Right.
They weren't learning that well to begin with. I don't know if you saw this in the news, but there is a young woman in Connecticut who is suing the school district because she graduated with a diploma and she cannot read. She is truly functionally illiterate, and she got a diploma. So now she's suing the school district, saying, "Hey, you didn't provide me with an education that I'm entitled to."
Right.
It's going to be an interesting case, but it is an extreme illustration of some of the problems we have in our public schools these days.
And even from that COVID crisis, keeping kids out of the classroom, the truancy rate is higher than ever. They never all that prior to COVID, they never came back to the classroom after COVID.
Well, a lot of parents thought that the remote learning thing was good. Now, obviously, those parents were, not paying attention. But I think that's why the truancy rate is up, because every time there's like a sniffle, like, "Oh, you stay home, honey. You can just attend online."
Yeah.
Not the same.
No, it's not. Folks, I'm all for, innovation. I'm all for, trying different methods for education. And sometimes, using the latest techniques to bring some professional into the classroom, maybe some superstar professor or teacher, is a wonderful thing. But it cannot make up on a regular basis for a classroom interaction. And anybody that says, it can, they're full of baloney.
I think a good illustration of that, Father, is Mass online for us Catholics. It's all well and good that you attend Mass online, but it does not have the same effect as being there in the church during the consecration, etc. It doesn't.
And you lose the whole sense of community.
Absolutely.
You cannot feel connected with, 10,000 other people viewing online. Now, along with that, when we were concerned about COVID, we were closing, that's what's happening, we were closing the churches.
Yeah.
It was a big mistake. If in the beginning I said maybe we should because everybody else is closing. But then after a while I said, wait a minute, I don't think we should be closing. I used to go to Publix. The people in Publix working in Publix.
As close as you and I.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So a lot of people got out of the habit of going to church. Now, some people even came to the churches wanting to get an exemption from the COVID shot. Some for moral reasons. They said, well, in the COVID injection, there are materials that were extracted from fetuses, aborted fetuses. We have a conscientious objection to that, and the churches wouldn't give it to them because they said, well, it's remote. But also there's something when we talk about conscience is that I have bodily integrity. And in my conscience, I do not want to take this shot. It violates me personally. I had a girl come to me. She said she got the first shot and she missed her period. She didn't want to take any more shots. And this girl was in medical school. This is no, person that just got scared by reading something in the New York Post, right? But she was genuinely concerned, and she said to me, "Can't you help me? can't you get an exemption for me?
And you couldn't.
I couldn't do it, through church channels, but I used the Pacific Justice Institute, and they worked with her to get the exemption for her. But otherwise,
Boom.
she couldn't. Yeah, otherwise, she couldn't go to school.
Ugh.
Otherwise, your kid couldn't go to school unless you had the shots. So, people do have a right to bodily integrity. This is my body. I have rights over it. God has given it to me. I have to take care of it. And yet, people are being forced to take shots, or you just couldn't go and hold them down and stick it in them, but you had to suffer the consequences. And It was a violation of our freedom. A violation of our freedom. And the churches have an obligation. All the churches, and the synagogues have an obligation to defend our freedom and the integrity of the person. It's part of what we call human rights. And I don't think that happened. And I think a lot of the churches, religious institutions, they lost some of their credibility with their people.
They rolled over to the government.
You better believe it. You better believe it. And all of a sudden now you have a country where, once again, who's running the country? The bureaucrats running the country. The churches have lost their voice, and they literally handed it over. Once we talked about the bureaucrats in the past who run the country. And of course,
And there's a great example.
and there's a great example. And of course, that's why we have to now begin to cut down on the bureaucracy and once again, allow people freedom. It comes as freedom of speech. It really is freedom of speech, freedom of religion. All of those things have to be protected.
And I think that, I keep reading, Father, well, there's going to be another pandemic. It's just a matter of time. I hope the next time the churches take the lead and, not shut people out. I think that if people had been given an option, listen, it's not a sin if you don't attend Mass.
Right.
You can attend online. But if you want to, the church is open.
That's right.
Anyway, we're about out of time.
Well, I'm going to say one more thing.
All right.
Mr. Producer, just leave this on. There's a book I talked about in the past by Jonathan Turley, and it's about freedom of speech. And a lot of freedom of speech was also curtailed during the COVID crisis. That's why Elon Musk ended up buying Twitter and making it X, because in Google, everybody was getting filtered out. You said something different, you got filtered out.
Yep.
Okay, now, freedom of speech means that, you're free to say what you want. And some people, they say, well, you got to rein in on freedom of speech. It might be destructive to society. And there's that old expression, you can't yell fire in a theater. Well, suppose the theater is on fire. Then you better yell it. And that's what happened. The theater's on fire.
Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you'll be here again next week, same time, same place. Until then, I'm BC Cloutier, wishing you a great week and God bless.